Thank you, Lydia. Thank you, Wise and Frank and all, for the opportunity to speak with you today about this subject. And I am from Cornell University, the Center for Conservation Social Sciences. This is not intended to be prescriptive. This is just some things that we've experienced in the US and in Canada when it comes to the so-called nutritional benefits of wild meat, which there are some, but there are ways to frame that well and ways not to do that. And that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit today. What are these lessons that can be learned from the North American context? So just to provide a little bit of background on this, there is a survey that happens about every 5 years in the US that talks about basically social legitimacy or social acceptance of hunting across thousands and thousands of survey respondents. And year to year, hunting to protect humans from harm or for wildlife management perspectives receives high levels of approval at 78 and 77% of the population surveyed. The N on these things is tens of thousands. So it's a significant survey data point. But the hunting for the meat is interesting. Generally, we have enjoyed in the US a high approval rating for hunting for meat at 75% this last time, though, which means that it's come down almost 10% from the prior survey data. And we think, and you'll see a little bit more about this, we think this has to do with a failing really to communicate the nutritional benefits for new hunters and new participants in hunting as part of our wildlife economy in the US. So if you're interested in this particular survey work, Mark Duda, who some of you may know of from Responsive Management and a colleague of ours in the center, is the one that does this survey, and you can talk to me after this. I'll make sure to give you the website so you can see that survey data if you're interested in it. What's happened since understanding and seeing that there was this decline in approval for hunting for the meat, a number of us have begun to think about what are we actually talking about when we're talking about food as a motivation to recruit, retain, and reactivate new hunters to the hunting industry within the wildlife economy. So we have three spheres of food motivations in hunting, the first being food ethics, the second being nutrition and health, and the third, the sort of culinary quality and adventurous eating, some of which Francine hit upon earlier today. I think it's important to actually understand when we're talking about food as a motivation or as an opportunity for social acceptance of hunting, that we don't paint with too broad a brush. We need to understand these three spheres. So the first sphere is this food ethics sphere. And in this, we're talking about how consumers do, according to the statistical data that we're looking at, they do want to know where their food comes from, and they want to be assured that this protein has had a high quality of life and it can be observed experiencing what is considered a high quality of life before becoming food. Now, the Petri dish version of this aside, I know from experience that when the quote unquote foodies want access to what's called organic meat in the United States, there is a high premium paid on being able to actually see the animal in its environment on the farm or in the wild. There's also this reality that consumers are expressing interest in having evidence of that food existing in perceived natural environments. This is also coming from some of the same survey data. So that is something that we need to have larger conversations, I think, about when we're talking about the meat industry here as it relates to the larger picture of the economy, the wildlife economy here. The other thing that talk about in the food ethics sphere is that there is a whole sort of other worldview around indigenous ways of thinking about relationships with other animals as kin and also meat. And there are interesting articles being written now, including a book that I would recommend called Braiding Sweetgrass, where there is an interesting way of resolving the tension between meat as food and animals as members of a larger family. We can have more conversations about that in the food ethics sphere. In the nutrition and health sphere, this is the one I think I really want to hit hard on now. What we've found is that there are these things called, they're white labels, or nutrition information fact labels that are now becoming very, very popular on foods in the United States and Canada. And those give the consumer, because of consumer demand, all the information about the quality, the nutritional quality of whatever the food it is, and the packaging on it. This doesn't exist, of course, or hasn't, existed for wild game. So members of my lab and also my wife, who's a nutritionist, have been working to find, to fund and then find what the nutritional content of game species, over 200 harvestable game species in North America. This is an expensive proposition, but it's important because we're finding that when there is a nutritional fact label associated with, for example, white-tailed deer, then consumer satisfaction around eating this meat goes up dramatically. When there isn't nutritional data available, we're just saying that it's healthy sort of anecdotally, then satisfaction or desirability is affected. I want to move on quickly to this culinary quality and adventurous eating that Francine talked about a little bit in her presentation this morning. You can see just in sort of consumer food here in Africa, South Africa in particular, this is on the menu, and there's a great demand among the tourist market for these adventurous eating experiences. And I think Francine did a good job of showing how there's opportunity within the tourism side of the hunting industry to add more to that, not just because consumers themselves who are coming here might appreciate it, but there's also this larger optic of what we saw in that first slide, that there is acceptance of hunting more so if there's meat involved in that hunting. So there are some perhaps instructive things for particularly the international hunting, or what we've called trophy hunting in some cases here today. There's some interesting implications for how that might be integrated, not just for the experience of the tourists themselves, but also the optics. This is a reality when we're talking about social legitimacy of hunting within the larger wildlife economy. So I just want to briefly now, again, not being prescriptive, just share with you some examples. These are, looks like 6 peer-reviewed journal articles that deal with specific species, doing what it takes to do the nutritional analysis, what the results might look like. And I think Mr. Matibe and others that are promulgating a meat strategy, I would say that we should have a conversation about what works well and what doesn't in terms of appealing for funding for nutritional information. I mean, I can imagine we've got a whole suite of plains game that we probably aren't as up to speed on as we should be in terms of the nutritional quality of those meats. And also, you can see there are food motivations for hunting and angling. This is just a subset of some of the collections here that you see, as well as others in the space of how this nutritional information might be useful in terms of social legitimacy and social acceptance of hunting. And I hope that you'll take a look at that, and I'm happy to share slides or share papers as needed. So I guess I'll just conclude with some, from my standpoint in the US or in North America, I think we've got to think about investment in all 3 of these spheres, not just in the idea that meat is part of the market. And that in the food ethics, I think in that sphere, a kind of call to action might be to seek or create opportunities to do better with communicating all the food ethics implications here. And those have been made even more complex by some new ideas today. We have to think about that and be ready to answer those questions. In the nutrition and health sphere, you'll need to, I believe, like we have to have done in the US, create these research partnerships between government agencies. For us, it's the Food and Drug Administration, the US Department of Agriculture, and the Department of Interior. All 3 of those agencies needing to work together to figure out how to fund and then properly advertise or disseminate the results of these studies, keep them on databases so that they're available to the public. And then finally, in the culinary quality and adventurous eating space, I think that continuing to encourage and support, like Francine suggested this morning, hunting opportunities that experiment with enhancing this foodie experience is important. Just last week, we had the African Wildlife Consultative Forum, and we heard an excellent speech or talk from Deneen in Namibia, who includes a very high-level cuisine, sort of culinary experience in her operation. And I think there's a rich opportunities there for thinking about the way that meat fits into the larger economy, if you will, of wildlife and the meat strategies in particular. With that, I'm exhorting, if you will, the industry to consider these food motivations for these hunters that are coming from abroad, because what we saw in that survey data clearly indicates that food motivation still, even though it fell a little bit, that's still a high motivation and a high justification, if you will, for those that don't hunt, the continuance of hunting as a part of the larger wildlife economy. That's what I have for you today. I hope those experiences and observations from North America will be useful as we continue to discuss the food component of the wildlife economy.